This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month. Patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns, and it is time for a spoiler-filled discussion on John Jackson Miller's new Star Wars book, The Living Force. Joining me for that discussion is Albert from the Cantina Cast. We'll talk more about it in the episode in just a second, but the Cantina Cast was the first Star Wars podcast I ever listened to, and I had a bit of a moment when we started chatting, and I was like, I have heard your voice in my ears so many times, and now you're here and we're talking, and it's me you're talking to, not just the microphone, and it was cool. This is a great conversation. I had so much fun, and I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we enjoyed recording it. You and I met briefly in person.
We did.
Which is wild. At Star Wars Celebration
2019. Oh, it's 2022. Okay.
It was in California. And I only remember that because it was just a wild weekend. And we had just stood in line for several hours to get those special edition High Republic books that they had.
Yeah.
And we'd
Get
come
back here.
Yeah. Mine are.
I've got mine up.
Somewhere back there. There they are.
Somewhere back there.
Yeah. And we'd come straight from that to the panel we were all at. And you just came up to me and you were like, hey, what's up? And I didn't tell you at the time, and I'll tell you now because I don't really talk about this very much, but Cantina Cast was the first Star Wars podcast I ever listened to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was. I think it was. So I was a Star Wars fan when I was younger. And then in like middle school, high school, kind of like drifted away from it because I don't know why. It just happened. But I really got back into the fandom around the time that The Last Jedi was coming out. And I'd bought my tickets for that movie and I was like, I am so excited. I need to consume as much Star Wars as possible because I can't wait for this movie. So I started reading a bunch of the books, but also I was really into podcasts and I was like, I wonder, this is me at the time not knowing anything about the Star Wars fandom. I was like, I wonder if there are any Star Wars podcasts.
Oh boy, are there?
So so I went on to whatever and I was like, let me search for Star Wars podcasts, and your podcast came up, and still listen all these years later.
Well, thank you. So you came in at a very volatile time for our show, to be honest. If I pull back the curtain a little bit, because I don't know if Joa and Mike were still on when you started listening, or if I was there yet. Do you remember? So Joa was on up until the Last Jedi released.
Okay.
And he had an absolute, I'm going to call it a meltdown.
No.
But he really became a part of the fandom, like the fandom menace at that point. And so we were going through a volatile time where Mike and I had to make a decision about, like, we can't have him on the air. I mean, if you go look at the reviews around that time on Apple Podcasts, and we were just getting slammed and hit hard from people saying it's just so negative. Why am I listening to the show? The show is really falling from grace, kind of thing. And so we were doing a lot of damage control. Joa eventually left on his own. And then Mike started to feel the same way. Like, this is not my Star Wars. And he removed himself, which I think is huge of him. Like, he acknowledged, I'm toxic. I don't like the way this is coming across. It's not looking good for the show. I'm going to take a step back. And he left the show. And so that left myself looking for somebody to bring in. And luckily, Jonesy was kind of in our Discord and we'd been talking to him. And so that's how Jonesy ended up jumping into the show. But that was such a crazy period of time. And it maybe still is in some ways. But yeah, it's thankfully I like The Last Jedi. So I think we did okay. But boy, talk about divisive, you know?
Yeah, I think I did come in right around that time, and I don't remember a lot of that going on, but that is wild that all of that happened, and yet still going strong.
Yeah, still going.
Yeah, it's
14 years.
that is that's so many. In a good way. In a good way.
14 years. And I think we're over 700 episodes. I think we're numbered at 548. But if you look at all the episodes, Patreon, that's not even including Patreon. Patreon puts it probably up about 850, 900, somewhere around there.
I mean, I've been doing this for almost 2 years and it feels like I've been doing it forever. So I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Like what's another 100 episodes, right?
Oh, yeah, we'll see. Let's see what happens. No, I genuinely love it. And I have such a long list of just people, creators, podcasters, just random people I know on the internet who I want to have on the show. And I was going down the list recently because I'm trying to record ahead, which is why this episode won't come out until a month from when I'm recording, I think, or something like that. And I was like, I've wanted to talk to Albert for so long, and here we are.
Thank you.
I always I reach out to people to talk to people all the time. It's what I do. But I always have this moment where I'm like, oh, what if they say no? But I'm like, no one has ever really, like, if someone has ever said no, there's like an actual legitimate reason. And I'm like, just do the thing. And that's why we're here. That's fun.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Very sweet.
What are you telling me? Zoom, don't you dare betray me. No, I don't want to use that. Get this AI out of my... Nope. No, thank you. All right. So we're here, and what we're here to do is talk about my favorite Star Wars book of the year so far, which is The Living Force by John Jackson Miller. Very good books this year so far, but this is the one that made me feel the most things, and gave me the biggest range of emotions, and it's just so well constructed, and we'll talk all about that, and I can't wait to do that. But first, it is your first time on the show. It likely will not be your last, because I love talking about books and people who love talking about Star Wars and books and things like that. But because it's your first time, we'll talk about you a little bit. But the question I like to ask everyone to start is, what Star Wars are you currently reading, or what's the most recent Star Wars that you have read?
Boy, okay. So the most recent thing is the Saber for Hire comic book by Kevin Scott. So that comes out as of this recording. It'll be out here next week. So I can't talk about it, but I loved Ty York, and I love what Scott did with her first run with the comic book. So this picks up right from there, and I enjoyed it. Like, it's only one issue so far, and I think there's like 4 or 5. I forget how many total in the series, but I'm currently reading that one. Everybody's back as well. Like, Rachel Stott is the artist on that comic book. She kills it. Every single page is so phenomenally brilliant and vibrant. But yeah, I'm currently reading that. And then we're actually revisiting this book here, which is Clone Wars, Tales of Light and Dark.
Yes.
Because, we've been talking on our show, Lauren and I have been talking about covering Bug, the short story that's at the very back by Anne Covenry. And after Tales of the Empire trailer release, we realized, like, okay, we probably should come back and finally do some kind of breakdown, some kind of coverage on that story, because in our heads, that is Morgan Elsbeth. And until someone says anything different, this story is about her. And so we really want to get into all the speculation and theories as to why that possibly could be, and all the telltale signs that are in the book, outside of the fact that it's just a great short story by Anne, which I absolutely adore. But those are the two things outside of The Living Force, which I've read now. I think this is on my third, 2.5 readings. I'm about halfway through my third reading. But love this book so much. Yeah.
Oh, that is such a good short story.
I know. And it's like they snuck it right at the very
Yeah.
back. It's the last story. It's so like innocuous and you don't think much of it until you read it and you're like, oh my goodness, what is going on here?
Oh, it took me a minute when the book came out to actually read it because the advanced review copy at the time didn't have the story yet. There was like a placeholder. It was like the story's not yet final, and so we didn't get to read it ahead. And I was like, oh, I wonder what that story is, and I kind of forgot about it. And then everyone started talking about this amazing story that comes at the back of the book, and I'm like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? And I went and I read it, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever read.
Yep. It's so good. It is definitely the highlight, the standout for me in that book. And there's some other great short stories in there, of
Mhm.
course, but
Yeah.
that one definitely makes a
Oh
name
yeah.
for itself.
Oh, I gotta reread that one. Oh, that'll be good. Uh, yeah, that's really good stuff. I can't wait to read that comic. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I mean, outside of that, I think I'm waiting. I mean, I think I'm caught up finally. Like
Mm.
it has been an onslaught of just book after book
Yes.
after book and the advanced reader copies coming in. And I feel like I finished Living Force and I thought, I look behind me and I'm thinking, do I have other ones that are sitting on the shelf that I've just tabled? And I was like, no, I'm caught up, which I can't believe for the first time ever in quite some time. But that doesn't mean that the tsunami isn't going to, a second wave is not coming because we've got all the other
Mm.
books come from phase three still, which I'm looking forward to, of course.
Oh yeah. Temptation
Yeah.
of the Force is probably coming soon for us.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh boy. And then Disney likes to send the or they have been the past couple times sending the both the YA middle grade for the next wave at the same time. And I'm like, don't do this to me. Now I have to
I know.
choose.
Right.
Now I have to
Yes.
choose which one.
I know. Like, which one do you start with? Yep.
Oh, it's gonna be great though. It's to be able to spend the summer reading more new Star Wars. Will
I
be
know. Oh,
absolutely
poor us.
fantastic. I
Poor
know,
us. I miss.
tragedy, the
It
worst.
is a embarrassment of riches at times.
Thankfully, because I'm also other than comics, I need to catch up on some comics, but other than that, I'm all caught up on current books. So I'm reading through the New Jedi Order for the first time. Um,
Oh, enjoy that.
and
That's fun stuff.
it's so fun. I can only do like one book at a time because I get done with one and I'm like, this is a lot. I need to breathe. Um, but really, really enjoying that. And I
Yeah.
like it's good to like have time to feel like I can go back and do that because eventually I would like to read through all Legends and I've done like a decent amount, but there's a lot. There were a lot of books published between
Yep.
1976 and 2013, so
A lot of books. Yeah.
there's a lot.
Although there was a period of time, and well, maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, but there was a period of time, and we all call like kind of the dark times where we didn't have a lot of Star Wars
Yeah.
coming out. And funny enough, like that was I was fortunate to have lived through that period of time, or maybe unfortunate. I don't know, however you want to look at it, but yeah, it wasn't. I was never expecting the amount of books to come out after having gone so long with nothing
Mhm.
that came out after that. When we finally
Yeah.
went full throttle into Legends after the Zahn series, and we had, I mean, books popping out every basically year and a half. I was just, again, it was a blessed time to be alive. We had so much Star Wars through the novels. We didn't have any movies necessarily, but yeah, great time to have. And yeah, there were a lot of books out there. And even then, like it was hard to keep up with them at times. There
Yeah.
were so many that were out and you'd find yourself getting backlogged with books to read. And yeah, I mean, it's probably no different than it is right now outside of the fact that these are all canon and for the most part I've enjoyed a lot of these stories and I can't say the same thing with Legends. Like as
Yeah.
much as I love the Legends stuff, it's kind of hit or miss, right? It was
Yeah.
kind of all over the place,
Yeah.
but it was something for everybody. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. It's wild to think just in the last year how many books have come out and
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see what the pacing of releases is or will be after the High Republic as we know it ends and kind of like because we've for the past 3-4 years we've gotten these consistent like these High Republic books will come out this time. We always know that like every a couple times a year there'll be a wave, but it'll be interesting when that's
Yeah.
not. It's almost like hard to remember now when that wasn't a thing. Um
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Project Luminous. And that's funny, thinking about that, just kind of taking it further and just pure speculation on my part because that's what we do on the show.
yeah.
Um, right about now would be the time, at least this year, would be the time that if they were going to launch a new initiative,
Mhm.
they're probably going to want to start, you know, teasing it right about
Yeah.
now. So I'm not saying anything. Maybe we hear maybe something around May 4th. maybe at Celebration next year, probably before Celebration, I would imagine. But it's probably not much longer because you got to. I'm sure they're not like, oh, phase three's done. Now what should we do? I'm sure Michael Siglain has already kind of got all this in planning, right?
Yeah.
And they're just keeping it hush hush. So
Oh yeah.
I'm excited to hear what that is. Whether that's they go back to this era, maybe they go back to the Old Republic. Maybe they try to do something to coincide with the release of the new movie, some kind of new Renaissance Jedi Order series, right? Something like that. But I would imagine, yeah, we're going to get something here soon because they've got to start the planning process already.
Oh yeah. I didn't think about that. The fact that we would probably get a tease relatively soon, which I'm doing my best to contain my excitement at the moment. I've not thought extensively about it, but with the success of the High Republic, every single one of these books, or almost all of them being bestsellers, every single time they just hit. I can't imagine that they're not going to do something else. It won't be
Yeah.
exactly the High Republic, but like, there's no way that they're not going to take the success that they've had, plus everything that they've learned, and apply that to a whole other thing. Like, they have seen that it works and that it's effective, and that people are discovering Star Wars books and getting into these books because of the High Republic, because they hear about this story and they're like, oh, there are more books than this, which I think is the coolest thing in the world. Um, to have new
Yeah.
book fans who jumped on because of Light of the Jedi or any other book in the series. I just think it's so cool.
Yeah, and we got to keep in mind too with Acolyte coming out, right? That could be
Mhm.
yet another springboard to
Yeah.
continue that era.
Mhm.
Either after or before, or wherever they want to do it. I mean, they still got a lot of territory, a lot of runway to play with. But that could bring on a whole new set of people that are interested in that particular time frame. So you're right that this is probably not going to ever go away, which is a good thing because I think
Yes.
I know I follow you on social media, so you're in the same boat I am. I think the High Republic has been the most exciting thing that's come out from Disney since they've did the acquisition. Quite honestly,
Mhm. Yeah.
so
Oh,
yeah, looking forward to all that.
me too. Let's talk about you. And let's talk about, you've talked about Star Wars for so long and you've been a fan for even longer. Tell me about your history with Star Wars books. How did that all start for you, and kind of how did it lead you to what you're doing now?
Yeah. Wow. So again, I'm going to age myself here. So the very first book, and I actually brought it with me, so I could show you. So this is audio, but I'm going to show you. So these are the Scholastic books. This is the Star Wars storybook. I have the Empire Strikes Back storybook, and then I've got the Return of the Jedi storybook. So these were my first entry into Star Wars reading. Uh, and the funny thing is about this book, like when you read, I'm trying to pull this up without hitting my microphone, but when you pull this up and look at the inside of this book, it has like these little character bios for each of the characters,
Oh.
and they are so funny. Like they are spot on with the characters that we've known and come to love, like Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Darth Vader, et cetera, et cetera. But there still really wasn't a lot of information out there about who
Mm.
these people were. And so like seeing this and like especially Kenobi, this is what really got me interested in reading Star Wars. His little description down here, and if I'm going to read it, this is kind of right out of the book, the movie as well. But it says Obi-Wan. It says Ben Obi-Wan Kenobi, a good and just warrior of the Old Republic, who possesses a special power called the Force. Reading the Old Republic, and you think, oh my gosh, not only have we been dipped in the middle of some massive saga, but they've also dipped us in the middle of a timeline that where this Old Republic existed at some point, right? And I was so fascinated by that I wanted to know everything about the Old Republic. Fast forward to now, and I'll kind of come back to this in just a little bit, but fast forward to now, until the High Republic came out, my favorite era of Star Wars was the Old Republic. I am an active player of Star Wars, the role playing game, SWOTOR, even to this day, because of that. But I became so fascinated to think that this timeline was so huge, and we were just dumped in the middle of this like sprawling environment of history and Jedi's and lightsabers and that sort of thing. I really enjoyed that, and so as a kid, so this book came out, I think, right around 78, I think, from Scholastic Books. And I ordered this through my elementary school book fair kind of thing. So then I went immediately to my library, in a very small library, very, very tiny village, very tiny school that I lived in. But they had one Star Wars novel out, which was, to be fair, probably the only one outside of this novelization that Lucas allegedly wrote. That one is Splinter of the Mind's Eye by Alan Dean Foster. And I took that book and I read it, and I was so captivated by the imagery of the cover itself. But I read that book over and over and over. I mean, as soon as you had to take books and check them back in. As soon as I check it in, I would just check it right back out, take it home, read it over and over again. And that was like my lifeline. I was clinging to that book for so long. And then later on, I came to find out that there was a solo series and a Lando series, but I never could get access to those growing up. So I never read those until much later in my life. And you think about that and fast forward now through what we were just talking about earlier with like the Dark Times, there really wasn't a lot of stuff that came out after Jedi. You were like, okay, where are all the books? Where's all the rest of the story? And we didn't have it. And that's what made when Timothy Zahn came out with Heir to the Empire, outside of that being just an incredible story, beginning to end, still until the Rising Storm came out by Cavan Scott. That was my favorite book, Star Wars book of all time. So now it's the Rising Storm with Heir to the Empire just underneath. But to be alive and to be around circa 91, 92 when that book was released, and to be a Star Wars fan and to have had like these very secretive, I wouldn't say not secretive, but just these conversations with people in very small circles, because it was hard to find fans, and there wasn't even really anything to talk about with Star Wars, right? We had to make up our own stuff. But to suddenly have this book front and center and see that at Walden Books or any of the other bookstores that are now long gone, see that in the display and walk in and get your hands on that book. And then I remember coming home, I think it was the summer of my senior year, around that time, and I think I had missed some days of school just so I could sit down. It was all I wanted to do was read that book. And ever since then, I stuck with it. I mean, I had to just, outside of the movies, of course, the books were really all we had. We had the comic books come back. And I started to realize that I'm a completionist. And by every mean, like everything good and bad that comes with being a completionist. And that's why I love the Star Wars books. Like I have this huge FOMO that if I don't read these books, I'm not going to know what's going on in the galaxy. I'm not going to be able to relate to these stories. And the reality is, most of the authors, if not all the authors, do a really good job of filling in the blanks, so you don't have to ever feel like you have to read everything and be a part of everything. But for me personally, I can't let that go. And so that's why I subscribe to all, Star Wars Insider. I have all the books coming in, the comic books. I mean, whatever it is, I want to consume it all, just because I'm worried that I'm going to miss out. I'm not going to get these adventures. But outside of that, I love them too. So that's kind of where I am. And then it's been like that for years now. And again, we talked about this earlier, but it's just an embarrassment of riches to have as much Star Wars content outside of the books, right? That we have these today, that really, whatever you want from Star Wars, you can certainly get in every possible way these days. So it's a wonderful time to be alive.
It really is. And, I always like to say, like, there's never going to be a shortage of Star Wars ever again.
Ever again. Yep. Which was what Lucas wanted, right?
Yes.
I mean, I see a lot of people upset with what happened with the Disney sell. He's not a dumb person. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was leaving his legacy. He was allowing these stories to be told by other people, so that other folks through the years always be available to be consumed by them, right? So it was the smartest thing in the world. And a company as Disney, you can say what you want about whether you like the stories or not, but there's no arguing that the Star Wars legacy will live on practically forever at this point.
Yeah. I don't like to think about it too much, but the reality is there will be Star Wars after us.
No, don't say that.
I know. I don't like.
We're not going to be able to.
We're
not going to. Yeah. No.
I'm sorry.
We're going to miss out.
But it's also so cool to think about, because it's just like there will be something for someone to enjoy for so many years.
Absolutely.
And, if there's not a new book coming out, there's a comic. If there's not, I mean, there's always a comic, but there's a show that's coming out, or there's a show that's currently on. Movies, who knows? Who knows?
Video games, card collecting games, all the merchandise. I mean, that still continues to happen. All that has been kind of taken a back seat these days. But yeah, there's something always of Star Wars to be had, should you like to do so.
And, there's like plenty of Star Wars podcasts, as I discovered.
No, were there really?
We're on one right now.
Oh, that's right. We are.
I love that. I am a little bit jealous. I have to admit. I wish that I had been at an age where I could read when Heir
Heir to the Empire came out. And at that time when, there hadn't been a lot of Star Wars, there hadn't been a ton of books, and then all of a sudden literally a whole new universe opened up, expanded, if you will.
Yeah.
I was there, but I was not there. But I love hearing people who were there experiencing that talk about it, because because I can't imagine what it was like, but I can listen to other people talk about what that was like. That's cool. I love
it.
That
Really was. It was so like life-giving in so
Yeah.
in not to be overly dramatic, but it was very much life-giving because like and just to kind of paint the picture again, just pull it back even further. What I mentioned earlier, right? During those dark times, there were some comics that were coming out here and there. Right around that same time, we got the Dark Empire comic book that came out as well. So, but that's still even prior to that, my relationship with Star Wars was in closed knit circles, like going out to, if I should ever visit a convention, you'd find the people there. There really weren't like Star Wars clubs. We didn't have the internet. There wasn't, social media, of course. And so, what I was very fortunate to have done at the time, I was working at SeaWorld of all places, and I had the most mundane job. I'm going to just stay with me here. I had to go out there, and they had these bronze statues, and our whole job for that whole summer, I think summer of '91, our whole job was to go through and manually scrape off all the wax off these statues and then apply a new coat of wax. And that was it. It was like a 3-month gig that I had in the summer. I come to find out that two of the people there were 6 of us in this little crew, and we'd get up at like 5 in the morning and be out there by 6 a.m. starting. 2 of the people were avid Star Wars fans. And that really was kind of life-changing, because I've suddenly, for the first time in so many years, had somebody I could talk to about Star Wars. And they weren't just like, oh, I like Star Wars, I've seen the movies. This was like, no, tell me the trash. We would challenge each other to trivia. Like, okay, tell me what the trash compactor number was during episode 4. 326, 3827. All right. And then we'd go to the next person and they would bang. And so we'd bang trivia all summer long. And it was there that I started to really appreciate the idea, because we used to speculate. That was all you really had. There was nothing to go off, right? So we had plenty of time to speculate, create theories, cockamania theories, whatever, tinfoil hat theories, as far as you want and as much as you'd like. But that's really all we had, because there was no Star Wars at the time. So I say that because suddenly to go from that, then to have something concrete, something more material in Zahn's books and the Dark Empire comics, and then everything that fell after that, was absolutely life-changing. Like, it really completely, set the course of where I was going to go with Star Wars. Because I was, until that point, I was a Star Wars fan, but I was never like I was today until all that happened, right? That really was kind of the birth for me of becoming such a fanatic, that I wanted to consume everything and learn everything and memorize the opening crawl to episode 4, right? Going in and digging my heels into whatever I could get my hands on as far as Star Wars goes. That was really the birth, the antithesis of it all. So yeah, it's a great time. It was really weird too.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun.
It was stressful too, I think, at times.
Yeah. I mean, again, I can't imagine, like, you wake up and there's some kind of new Star Wars something happening.
Every day.
Yep.
Every day. Yeah, we get some news of some sort, or something's been released, or
there's some speculation or a theory.
Yep. Water cooler talk all day long.
Yep. I love it. All right. Let's talk about a book, a Star Wars book, a relatively new Star Wars book called The Living Force. Don't know if you've heard of it.
I may have talked about it ad nauseum by now, but yes, I have heard of this book.
Okay, so quick story for you. Last year, I think it must have been the end of August last year. I ended up talking to John Jackson Miller about Kenobi, because it was the 10-year anniversary of the release. And I was like, hey, do you want to talk about this book? And of course, he was like, yes, because no one else has asked me to. And it was very cool. But, we had this whole conversation about a book that he'd written 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And at the end of that conversation, I was like, well, if you ever, return and write another Star Wars book, we'll have to talk again. Kind of joking, because, he's doing Star Trek stuff. He's doing all this stuff, and did not know what he knew, because not that long after that, I think it was maybe a couple weeks after that, they were like, oh, hey, guess who's writing a new Star Wars book? And I was like, how dare you?
No way. Did
Um,
he let on at all during that conversation? Did he ever give anything away?
no, I don't think he could. I don't think he knew when they were going to announce it, so he couldn't say anything. But
Gotcha. Yeah.
when I talked to him again, I was like, "You knew?" And he's like, "Yeah, the book was like almost done by then." And I was like, "No, that's not fair. Not fair."
Oh, the secrets they
Um,
keep. Yep.
yeah, I mean, I have to, which
They have to.
I
Yeah.
I I don't know how like you can work on something for that long, know that something is existing for a year or two before it actually comes out, or before anyone even knows that it's
Mhm.
happening, and not be able to say anything about that. Because like, if you're working on something like that, and obviously he loves writing Star Wars and writing books, and he's so excited about it, and to not be able to even say anything, I can't imagine that.
Yeah,
um
it's that same experience that we see when the actors have been announced for a TV series or even like a
mhm.
movie is probably the big one. Or how many times have we seen Dave Filoni up on stage and they're talking about the new series and they've got the cast up there and everybody keeps looking over at Dave like, "Can I say anything?" And he's like, "Nope." I mean, it's just living with that. I mean, that
Yeah,
has to be just pure suffering
yeah,
as a Star Wars fan, honestly.
yeah. I mean, I wonder if you get used to it. Like, is it
You
like,
probably do. You're probably
yeah,
desensitized after a
yeah.
while. You're like,
Well,
yeah,
also like
whatever.
if you're working on like, you're not, by the time it's announced, you're no longer like actively, you're at a different like point. So maybe it's like,
Yeah,
oh, now I'm focused on this other thing that I'm doing and I can't talk about that yet, but now I can talk about this. So it must be a
right.
cycle. Like there's always something to talk about. I can't pretend to know what that's like.
I think you're right. I think you're spot on. That's probably
Yeah.
exactly what it's like. So
Ugh. But I made this huge deal about, him returning now to Star Wars, and he's like, well, you know, I was never really gone, because he wrote, he did Kenobi, which is his last Legends book, and then he did A New Dawn, which is the first um canon novel. But then he did a couple short stories in between. Uh
yeah, orientation being one of them. I want to bring that up
yes.
tonight
Oh, oh
for Star Wars
yeah.
Insider
Oh yeah.
because there were some deep cuts from the Inside the Living Forest from that short
Yeah.
story. So enjoyed that a lot. But yeah, but you're right. I mean, it had been 10 years
Yeah.
practically since a novel had come out from
Hmm.
him. So
Right.
yeah, to hear him come back, I think on social media I posted, well, the king has returned kind of thing because he sits up there for me with the Kenobi series, the Kenobi book, and then A New Dawn, and then I really enjoyed all of the stories that he did with the Lost Tribes of the Sith, going
Hmm.
because again, that's in my wheelhouse with the old Republic stuff.
Hmm.
So as far as I was concerned, he was kind of like the one of the kings, one of many kings that existed. I don't want to take anything away from Timothy Zahn and everything that he did, but yeah, it had been a while. You're right since he'd
Yeah.
come back and done something.
Yeah. And like, he'd always wanted to, and obviously he just had other stuff going on, but the fact that he finally was able to come back and, do something that he does really well, which is just writing about Jedi trying to figure out how to exist in the galaxy. um
Hmm.
and he
That's a
did it.
challenge in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it really was. But you know, even from like the first chapter, like he absolutely nailed it all the way through. Even just to show like this disconnect between the Jedi and everyone else. Which was actually very, very like wild to read, having just come off of reading New High Republic. And that's, it's so different in that era compared to
hmm
where we are now leading up to the prequels, where, the Jedi are not, they're still the Jedi. They're still trying to live up to what they're supposed to be doing, but it's so different than it was. And, we see throughout the beginning of the book and then the rest of the book as it goes on, they're kind of, not they're not doing exactly what they used to. They're kind of like
yeah,
moving away from being out in the galaxy helping people. Which is the premise of the whole book, which is Qui-Gon saying, "Hey, why don't you get off of Coruscant and go do something?"
do something else. Do something with your lives,
Yes.
please.
And I mean, it
Yeah, it
had.
was.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, no, just talking about the opening, right? It was brilliant the way the approach here. He brings us in through the eyes and the perspective initially from Qui-Gon Jinn and to some extent Kenobi, right? But the way they can when they get back to Coruscant and after they have that initial encounter with the everyday people and how how serving Qui-Gon is to those folks. I love that, by the way. I love the line that he tells Kenobi in that moment at the very beginning, saying that put everyone above you, right? I'm kind of paraphrasing, but put everyone above you, and that's where you want to start. Everybody's above you. You always have that kind of mentality. Yeah. And to go back and the way he used Kenobi to kind of go around to each one of the individual council members. And we got to see exactly what they were doing and, what everything wrong that came with, Yaddle being basically a defense lawyer or, Adi and Yoda trying to fend off some planet that was trying to send them red sneakers to wear because they felt the Jedi were influencers, right? They were of that status now. They were seen as influencers. And so they were sending product and saying, please wear this, which was a great moment. Another little funny moment there where Yoda mentioned that he had never worn shoes before. He said, I forget the quote exactly. I think I've got it written down here somewhere. But yeah, I mean, just that was the status. That was the current state of the Jedi Council and the Jedi Order, which is kind of sad if you think about it, right? And this book does a really good job, too, of living in the shadows of both everything that came before it in the High Republic and everything that was yet to come. With the Phantom Menace, and then of course with the Clone Wars, and certainly Order 66 and all that. But you can he does a good job of of nestling it in between both of those eras, and we're always reminded that they exist. But it's not heavy-handed, right? He doesn't focus on the High Republic too much. He doesn't focus necessarily on the future too much. But you can see the results of one and the beginning of the other, and that whole first part of the book does a really good job of kind of balancing those. And again, exposing what's really gone wrong with the Jedi. So it was beautiful. I think before we started recording, we talked about one of our favorite lines being, what would Qui-Gon do? To think that line was echoed by Ki-Adi-Mundi, right? Somebody who's been around for a very long time, has a lot of prominent stature, very wise Jedi by all accounts. To think that he's trying to think how Qui-Gon thinks says a lot, right? I love the fact that they were at least able to, identify and self-reflect on some of this stuff and realize like, okay, yeah, maybe he's right? Maybe we should I don't think not everyone was okay with this, but once May said, hey, we're doing this, and not only are we going to do this, but we're all going on this business retreat, right? Essentially is what it was. We're all going to go on this business retreat and really get to kind of, get in contact with the living force and certainly the people that we serve, the people that we should be serving, and not the corporations, not these, government planetary, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, but the planetary interests, right? They were so caught up on all that. And then the other thing I would just add to it is you start to get the sense that, okay, yeah, this is terrible, but how did they get there? Well, Palpatine, right? This was all part of Palpatine's plan. And he says as much, I think, at the very end when he's doing his little monologuing there. But, at the very end, he does kind of give away that, like, this was his whole part. He was trying to get the Jedi wrapped up in anything else but serving the galaxy and really getting them out of touch with the light. And by getting them out of touch with the light, again, this is what I kind of read between the lines, it allowed that darkness to seep in much easier than had they still been active and been a voice of the people and in touch with the common people right throughout the galaxy, the defenders of the galaxy. They were anything but the defenders of the galaxy at this point. So beautiful. I loved everything about that first part of how he opened up with that.
Yeah.
What did you think, though? Like, what was the most egregious use of a Jedi's talent? Because we had Plo Koon as a mechanic, right? You've got Yaddle, like I said, as the defense lawyer. They had Eth Koth out there, running inventory on a piece of paper and pen. I imagine him just sitting there checking boxes all day long. But it was just, what was the most egregious one for you?
I really think it was Yaddle for me.
Was it? Yeah.
I think so.
Such a waste of talent.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not. She probably made a great lawyer.
Yeah.
But that's not really what you want. You don't really want Yaddle doing that. Yeah.
No. I mean, she's becoming a favorite character for me just in general. We've gotten a lot of her in the last year or so.
Yes.
And I'm not mad about that. And I think her kind of storyline throughout was one of my favorites just in general. But yeah, definitely her at the beginning being like, it does not fit here.
Right.
Something is not gonna work. And when because one of the first things we heard about this book is it was going to be all 12 members of the Jedi Council going on this one joint mission together. And you wonder when you hear that, like, well, that's a lot of characters to have to kind of switch between. And so the way that he did this is pairing Jedi together so that there's not quite as many perspectives to kind of have to switch back and forth between, but you still get everyone's insight, everyone's point of view in that way. Did you have a favorite kind of like coupling together of the Jedi?
Oh, it was hands down. And I guarantee you, if you polled this question to, I don't know, 100 people, 99 people are probably going to say Aro Proof and Ki-Adi-Mundi, because they were hysterical throughout, beginning to end. From the very beginning, they were like an old married couple at times, the way they were just kind of bickering back and forth, and they knew each other so well. They knew how to get under each other's skin. I said at one point, and I didn't say this on our show, I was talking to somebody else about it. I don't know if you remember the Muppet Show, but they remind me of Statler and Waldorf, the two old dudes that were always up at the very in the balcony, just bickering and heckling. And I mean, they weren't necessarily heckling in this book, but there was just something about their chemistry that was just brilliant. And they had their, you know, very serious moments, if you will, throughout the book. But for the most part, they were kind of the comedic relief. And he did such an incredible job, fantastic job of writing these characters in the light that, one, I had never thought to think that either that these guys acted this way, right?
Yeah.
Or that they spoke to each other this way, or they would be in predicaments of like buying snow cones and arguing about whether or not no flavor is a flavor, and you know, then telling them, well, maybe, you know, I did you a favor. It was just hysterical. I never thought we'd get into that, or I'd see Ki-Adi-Mundi wearing like horns on his head and being part of a biker gang for all intents and purposes. It was just great stuff, and it works. Like, it absolutely works. It doesn't pull away from, you know, the tense moments or the heavier dramatic moments at all. It's very well balanced in the book. But just it, and honestly, me talking about it's probably not going to do it justice. You really got to go back. You have to read this book. When you get to those chapters where these two guys are, just be prepared. I think in my chapter notes, every one of those said it was like LOL or can't stop laughing, or, you know, just because I didn't have anything to summarize other than I just enjoy the dialogue and the way they played off each other. But that was by far my favorite. I think on a more serious note, I think the Yoda and the Adi relationship was it was just brilliant, and it was heart-wrenching too, especially when you get to chapter 42, which we can talk about here maybe in a little bit. But yeah, with chapter 42, maybe I know you want to kind of talk about the balance between the comedy and the tragedy. So I'll kind of table that just real quickly. The only other thing I want to throw out there, and this is trivial, totally trivial, but there at one point, Yaddle is riding a speeder bike, and it's like a kid-sized speeder bike. And I want to see that visually. Like, I mean, I can see it in my head, but there's something so adorable and so cute about thinking that Yaddle's sitting there on a speeder bike, her size, made for her. And unfortunately, I think someone calls her out as like a child. They think she's a child riding around. They're like, hey, you know, get back to your parents, kind of thing. But just moments like that, right? Were absolutely brilliant. But yeah, definitely Poof and Mundi. And then on the more serious side, and maybe the tragic side of it, I think the Yoda storyline that we had there is another favorite for me. Yeah. What about you? What was your who did you have?
Oh, I've been trying to think of who my favorite is, and I don't know if I have one. I think there's something about each one that just grabs me. Like, I obviously love Star Wars books, otherwise we would not be here talking about them. But I think this is the first Star Wars book I've read in a long time where I was completely drawn in on every page. And I think it was just like it was something about those pairings. It was something about, you know, him doing a great job of like establishing that they've all known each other for so long. You know, just bringing us right into the middle of that every time that they come up. It was, you know, like trying to, you know, going on this mission and trying to figure out while they're here how they can help. And it was something about every single one. I was like, I like this. I like this. This is great.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job, and I still like, I think about this often, and it's been months at this point since I read the book, I think, the first time. The way he makes you laugh out loud. Like, I actually did laugh out loud many times while reading this book.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But also, you know, those more tense moments, those moments that maybe almost make you cry. I may have cried. I can't remember now. But the way that he balances that, and it's so important to him that you do laugh, but that you also then also think about, oh, like this is saying something so much bigger than this particular scene. He does that so well. Knowing, being a very, very skilled comedy writer, but also being able to bring you back and be like, oh, remember where we're heading. Remember what's coming up in the future. Think about this and how that leads into the next thing. I love that because I love Star Wars is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be entertaining. We're supposed to laugh and enjoy it. But of course, there are also moments where we are feeling different emotions and we are thinking deeper about what is this saying about the galaxy as a whole, or even what is it saying about our lives. I can't believe that this book did that so well.
Yeah, I agree. There's some really good moments, and so I just want to quickly talk about the Yoda storyline and Adi. I mean, they have a good relationship together, but at one point, when Yoda, we could do spoilers, right? Yeah, of course.
Yep.
At one point, when Yoda, there's a character named Lyle who's a Sullustan, and he got mixed up in selling drugs because he was a tourist kind of guy at the time. He was in tourism, and tourism died here on Quinn, the planet, because they're just the Jedi had left and the Republic had left and a lot of companies had left, and so it was kind of withering at that point. And so he got involved in drugs, and long story short, he ends up getting hospitalized, and he has a father back home. And that chapter 42 is about Yoda going back and making the request or honoring the request of the Sullustan who got hospitalized. It said, "Hey, my dad's sick. He's dying. Can you please go take care of him? Watch over him." And that whole chapter is about Yoda showing up and just spending the day with someone who he immediately quickly realizes is probably not going to make it to the end of the evening, right? He's not going to make it through the day. And just that, like the compassion that Yoda shows. This guy comes and answers the door. Even though he's not he shouldn't be answering the door. He answers the door. Yoda walks in, and he immediately offers Yoda his chair, the comfortable chair to sit in. And Yoda, of course, declines. You would expect that. He declines the chair, and they sit down, and then they just start talking. And he's talking about everything from what life was like years ago when Quinn was a vibrant place, when Yoda was around at the time. They talk about the Grand Renewal, which was an initiative by the High Republic to kind of, reinvigorate the planet and bring all these wonderful, places or the revitalization, basically, right, of sorts. He goes through all of that, goes to the history of it, and then he starts talking about his son, who he has no idea, of course, that was mixed up in drugs. And Yoda's sitting there, and he knows that what's going on, and he makes the conscious decision not to say anything about it because that would take away from everything that this man's talking about. You can tell that, through his eyes, like we as parents, you can't, it's hard to see faults in your kids. And he's just gushing about his son and how wonderful he is and how, all the fun memories. He's talking about his wife. I mean, and so while this is going on, like, you're just like starting to really connect with anybody that's been through a situation where you've got somebody who is, in hospice care or doesn't have much longer to live. I think you've been here with that person, and you've heard these stories, and it was very relatable and grounded in just reality in so many ways. And then it ends with him, of course, passing on. But him wanting his last dying wish, kind of, so to speak, was being able to go and see that the quenchable fire, which was kind of that light that the planet of Quinn could all see from all directions, knowing that the Jedi were there, that they were protected, that their light existed even in the darkest times when night fell, right? That whole symbolism of it all. And then him passing and knowing that Yoda spent hours. He didn't have to, but he was there with them all through that entire time. I mean, you talk about helping one person, right? That was like the quintessential example of what Qui-Gon was doing. He was definitely 100% with the living force at that point. But that was the moment when I was reading that's where I teared up. I didn't break tears, but my gosh, I was not expecting to have such an emotional reaction to that scene. And it's a credit to John Jackson Miller's writing. It's so beautifully well written. And like I said, it's so relatable for I think for a lot of people. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the balance between that and then the snow cone event. I mean, just it's Diametrically different, but still a great storytelling from Miller on that one.
You have to have both, though, I think.
Yeah, you really do. You know, and to what you said earlier about examples of things to come. I was trying to find if I had the quote here, but I think I told you I have like 50 quotes. You should have put the number on this. Otherwise, I was going to come way armed than I should have been. But Adi confronts Yoda after that. And she asks him, you know, what, and I'm paraphrasing. If I find the quote, I'll read it here. But she paraphrasing, she basically says, hey, you knew what you did was tell a lie, right? Because you didn't tell him the truth about his son. And Yoda says sometimes it's not worth, you know, telling the truth, so to speak. And I think about that, and I think about like what's happening in the High Republic right now, and how some people in the High Republic in the council have kind of turned a blind eye and deaf ear over for what's going on, or they decided to kind of bury something and not really talk about it because they didn't want to, you know, get everybody riled up or everybody excited about anything. And that comes back to bite them, right? The lies that they've told. And so, you know, this not only does that kind of play into, you know, what's to come in some ways, or maybe, and definitely what's happened in the past, but it certainly plays into that whole, you know, the balance and bringing in things from both the High Republic and, you know, the Force Awakens and, I'm sorry, Phantom Menace era, right? And Order 66 and Palpatine's rise to power. He does a really good job. And there's plenty of other examples where he does weave that into it, but it's a great confrontation from Adi and Yoda to say, hey, you probably should tell the truth, even if it doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do. And I don't know who I would side with in that moment, because it's, you know, it's such a personal thing and it's such an emotional scene. I can see where Yoda's coming from, but I definitely see where Adi's right as well.
Yeah, that's something interesting to think about, because when the High Republic started, you know, we knew, oh, the Jedi are in a completely different place than they were. And then they started confronting all these things, and we started to wonder, you know, how do we get from this to where we meet the Jedi again in the Phantom Menace? And how do we then get to the rest of the prequels and what happened to change the Jedi, but also how has what's happening in the High Republic not carried over? And it's really like, you know, if not erasing history, kind of just like not being willing to acknowledge what happened for whatever reason.
Exactly. Yeah. It's burying your head in the sand, pretending like things didn't happen. And it doesn't, that, you know, that never goes well for anybody. It always comes back around. It always comes back to bite you.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about Star Wars books is how they connect even when they don't seem related. You know, all the themes are there, all the messages are there. You know, and you think like, oh, what do the High Republic and the Living Force have to do with each other? In this case, a little bit more maybe, but it's stuff like that where one line or one scene or one conversation, you're like, oh, that speaks so loudly about the franchise as a whole and this whole story that we're telling.
Yeah, there was a scene like that as well. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I think where Mace was talking, it was Plo Koon. He said it says the Galactic Republic had no army and Plo Koon was no general. I was like, whoa, that's kind of eerie.
No.
But he had the feeling that in defense of Quinn, wherever described by the historians as a military engagement, he would be considered the leader of the mobile cavalry. He certainly had organized it, right? And so it was kind of just, he's alluding to the fact that we all know, right, that at some point they are all going to become generals and they are going to be leading these, essentially leading the war from that general position. So that was kind of eerie to read, knowing that, you know, what we would know later down the road. Have you talked much about the Veers? Have you had a chance to talk about General Veers in this book?
Let's talk about him.
Well, he's not a general. Cadet Veers in this book, which I loved. I mean, I was not expecting to see him in there. But there was a line earlier on where I think it was Balo, who's kind of the captain of this of the ship, the Assurance, right? And he's got a number of really young people, very young, very green people on the ship that are helping him and he's really the only kind of naval force that's out there. He gets hired by the Republic, or he may get hired by other entities to do, defense. But at one point he says, he's talking to Mace Windu. He says, if there's a proper Navy someday, young Veers here will be in charge of it. Mark my words. And he's saying that kind of sarcastically, right? Because I think he's Veers plays the Captain Obvious role. I think there's 3 instances where they're chasing some starfighter, and the starfighter jumps into hyperspace. And the immediate words from Veers is they've jumped into hyperspace. And Balo gets so upset. He's like frustrated, like, thank you, Captain Obvious. You keep saying this. I can see they've left, right? But yeah, and that's why he says this line sarcastically. But fast forward to the Empire Strikes Back, where he's leading the ground assault on Hoth to capture the rebels, and like, wow, that's kind of eerie. That, and then to kind of bring it back, so on just while we're on Balo, whoa, totally different one. Balo and Veers, there is another scene. Well, I should say not another scene, but at the very end of this book, when we get into the epilogue, we learn that Mace Windu, right? Mace Windu sponsors the formation of a naval academy, right? It's kind of like the first naval academy that's out there, and Balo's in charge of it, right? And Veers is one of the first cadets, and of course, one of the main characters, Kyla, she becomes a cadet as well. This is the same academy that would come up later on during John Jackson Miller's short story called Orientation. And the story there, without getting into the weeds, the story there is basically Vader is sent by Palpatine because that school won't go under. Balo doesn't want to give it up to the Empire, but they're already using that school to pull out all kinds of recruits to fill in Star Destroyers and other Imperial ships, right? So he fights back. He bucks up against. He doesn't want this to happen, and ultimately, sadly, Vader ends up killing Balo. No. But this is the beginning of that. We get to see the start of that academy here, that naval academy that would then later on go and be kind of like the spawning pool for the Empire to pull their best cadets out and stick them into their ships. But again, just another example of, unless you've read that stuff, you probably don't know, but it's there. Here are the origins of, the Naval Academy and where Vader and Palpatine got a lot of their admirals and captains and all that. So really good stuff.
Yeah. Also a very good short story. Highly recommend.
Yeah, Star Wars Insider 157. Anybody that's playing at home, that's where you can get that one in there.
I think there are even more, details and references, Easter eggs, if you will, than I even noticed. Because he just puts so many in there, whether it's from things that he's worked on or just other Star Wars things. It's so fun to notice that stuff, and you don't have to know where all the origins of everything to really appreciate it, but it is fun when you do catch one and you're like, oh, I know what that is, or I know who that is, or I know what that's pointing toward, something that Star Wars books can do, and when they do it right, it's really fun.
It's really beautiful. Yeah, you're almost cheering them on. Yeah. There's I want to if I could, there's one other one that I want to bring up that's another kind of I guess it's probably more foreshadowing than anything else. And it goes to, actually jumps all the way to Return of the Jedi. At the very end of the book, there is so to kind of contextualize this, throughout the book, Deepa Billaba is basically trying to save Kyla, this 12-year-old girl. And she kind of, I would say, you could argue she brushes up against being too attached to the girl. Mm-hmm. And that becomes thematically one of the things in the book is attachments and what, how far is too far and what, how far is not enough kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And at the very end, you've got a very young Kenobi who is sitting there with both Qui-Gon Jinn and Yoda. And he asks the question, did Deepa go too far? Right. And he's talking about his lessons. Hey, you guys tell us that we're not supposed to have attachments. And there's a whole conversation, which is actually beautiful, right? But at the very end, the one thing I wanted to point out, the very end, Qui-Gon says, attachments are not the problem. Indifference is. He turned and called out as he walked towards the ship, save a friend, Obi-Wan, and that friend may save you. Now, if you just think about that line alone, there are countless examples of where someone has been saved that comes back to save them, right? We see that many examples in this book, honestly. You could argue that the Jedi, as part of getting in touch with people, they actually went and saved these people from things they either were immediately involved in or did not know were coming. And in return, everybody ended up saving the Jedi and saving Quinn and everything else, right? They all kind of rallied together at the very end of the book. But there are so many other instances in Star Wars where this exists. But the one that came to mind immediately for me was at the very end of Return of the Jedi, when Luke is dragging his father out, and it takes the helmet off, and they have that conversation. And he says, I will not leave you here. I've got to save you. And Vader says, or Anakin at that point says, you already have. And you could look at that too as he saved Anakin earlier on, and it was his father who ultimately ended up saving him. But again, it's just, it's like poetry. It rhymes. We see these as countless examples in Star Wars But I love that he threw this one at the very end. And again, I don't know, may not been it. This may have been just a way to kind of put a cap on everything that we just read. But my mind went immediately to Return of the Jedi and knowing how Luke had saved his father and his father saved him, and that love that exists between both of them. I was just I just loved it so much. Thought it was beautiful.
Oh, I didn't even think about that connection. But I love that. That's really, oh, I love it. Now I'm just having a moment. But that's
and there's so many quotes. I mean, there's so many moments like that where you could point to, things that were about to come or things that you could that applied to other circumstances in Star Wars. And it's he does a really good job, but I think a lot of the authors do, even in the High Republic, right? Some of the things that happen and some of the themes that happen that we deal with are very reminiscent of things to come down the road. And I love that because it allows us, we can relate to it because we've seen it already, right? It's not a new concept for us, but the characters may be different, the situation may be different, but that through line of it all is very common and very relative to us. So it makes for an enjoyable reading, and it certainly enhances the experience when we're reading.
Yeah, it's there are many different kinds of stories in Star Wars. You got your movies, your shows, your books, your audio dramas, whatever it might be, but all of it, there's so much of it now, especially, if you're even if you're just looking at canon, because canon there's so much of it now. So many stories can connect to and call back to, reference, build upon other stories that have come before. And it's been so fun to watch that happening, because you look at Aftermath, for example, very early canon, didn't have a lot to draw on in terms of like stuff from that era, because we were just getting into the sequel trilogy, didn't know a lot. And then you look at something like Shadow of the Sith, where he had so much to draw from and was able to pull together so many different things from so many different stories and crafted this beautiful, huge, amazing story from everything that existed, and then created new things, and as they do. But it's just so fun to see how a book like The Living Force can pull from all these different stories, look back, but also look forward like that. It is endlessly fascinating to me that they can just do that all the time.
I'm glad you called out Shadow of the Sith because that book you're right, it did an amazing job of pulling in so many references and queuing up certain things. We had a chance to have Adam Christopher on the show and do an interview with him, and it was just so insightful to see that so much of that was deliberate and some of it was conscious, right? These were the conscious decisions that he was making, and to see him they appreciate when they sneak this stuff in there or they put it in there, and then we catch on to it and we see it and acknowledge it and love it. It means a lot to them as well. So as Star Wars fans, right, take away the authors and the readers labels aside, we're at the end of the day all Star Wars fans, and what better way to connect than those sorts of things. Yeah. I forgot there was one other thing. I know I said that was my last thing, but I have one other thing. And this is I'm going to say this selfishly because I am a huge Star Wars Rebels fan. It is my absolute favorite Star Wars anything. I go back and forth between who's my favorite Jedi, Ezra Bridger or Luke Skywalker. I named my kid Luke, so I got to kind of lean there. Although I said it was Luke from the Bible, but I don't think my wife bought that. But so Luke or Ezra, and then my favorite droid. R2 is my favorite droid growing up, but man, Chopper's right up there now. Like I don't, it's hard for me to just separate the two. But I say that because Rebels is a huge thing, and of course, Kanan Jarrus was critical and pivotal, of course, in Star Wars Rebels. And we get that moment at the very end, again in the epilogue, when Mace is talking to Deepa Billaba, and she says that she's been considering, now that she's had this experience with Kyla, and I never saw this coming, right? I didn't really think about it too much, but she has such an emotional connection with Kyla, this young 12-year-old girl, that by the end of the book, when she sends her away to go to the cadet academy with Balo, she starts thinking, maybe it is time I take on a Padawan, right? And Mace is like, hey, it's not really common because you're on the council. You don't have to do this. You've got a lot of other responsibilities. And for her, something was calling to her, right? Something was calling to her and saying, now, for whatever reason, is a time that I need to take a Padawan. And of course, we all know who her Padawan's going to be. It's going to be Kanan Jarrus later down the road, right? And the one that got me, that just gave me the chills, was when Mace says to her at the very end, says, "The Force will look kindly on whomever you choose." I just love the fact that he says that because, he's such a special person. And we think about everything that Kanan did all the way up into his last, act, his sacrifice. What a special person he was for sure. But yeah, it was just a beautiful little moment again that is echoing stuff that will happen down the road and down the future.
Don't mind me. I'm gonna go rewatch all of Rebels now.
Back in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah. Oh man. No. Rebels is it is also my favorite Star Wars. I think nothing has yet to surpass that for me. It just is beautiful all the way through. I love it.
Well, if you ever want to talk Rebels, invite, just throw me an invite. I don't care what time, how long you want to talk. We can talk Rebels all day long.
Oh yeah,
all day long.
Yeah, we'll spend most of the time talking about Trials of the Darksaber, which is the best 23 minutes of television that has ever been created. I will not argue that point.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many great. I mean, I'm with you. Like that is in my top 2, top 3.
Yes.
But yeah, there are so many great arcs in Rebels, even from season 1, that just, oh my gosh, yeah, good stuff.
Oh, it is. As much as I would love to talk about Rebels and Star Wars books for the next 6 hours, this has been such a great conversation. And like you pointed out things that like I didn't even consider, which is my favorite thing about talking to other people about books, is because everyone reads a book and notices different things or has a different experience, and being able to listen to you talk about like, oh, like this may have been referencing this, or this made me think of this, like that is I'm thinking like I have already been thinking about this book so much, and I'm thinking so much more about all of the ways that it connects to the larger universe. And it's so hard to look at this book and not just notice how beautiful it is and how important it is to its place in canon and its place in the universe. I'm so glad that it exists. And I'm so glad that we got to talk about it. And I could keep talking about it forever. I can't get enough of this book.
Yeah, I'm with you. And if I could, my just kind of my parting words, I guess, or thoughts about this book. The one thing that I felt like this book did really well is it's so easy for us to paint the Jedi as the bad guys, right? As the quote institution, especially right now, right? I'm not saying anything about Acolyte because we don't exactly know how that's going to portray the Republic or the Jedi Order specifically yet. But it is easy when you to take things out of context or take things too far. Like when we hear Luke talk about in the Last Jedi about how the Jedi had kind of fallen from grace and they were, basically arrogant and that sort of thing. It's easy for us to take that and kind of focus on that negative. And what he does here is he does a great job of assuring us that the Jedi really are good people. Like the light is not gone. And even by the time we get to the Phantom Menace, yeah, things are different. And maybe they don't always have the best people in Jedi Council. Cyphus Diaz, we're looking at you, right? But maybe they don't have the best people out there, but they are good people. They are the heroes. And we need to keep that in mind and keep that in check as we do that. It was a book that I felt like we really needed at the time, right now, to kind of reset things and kind of reset the perspective of the Jedi Order. But then it also just kind of humanizes the Jedi in a way that we've never seen before. Like they are kind of gods in a way. And this put them at ground level. This put them at an even playing field with everybody else. And it challenged them in ways that we never thought they would have been challenged. This is not a book where you're going to every 2 chapters have lightsaber combat, or every 3 chapters there's a big space battle, right? We're not going to have these huge monumental wars and climaxes. This book has very like real relationship type things. We just have the Jedi as the main players, and that humanizes them in a lot of ways. And that was something that I wasn't expecting. And now going back and watching the prequel trilogy completely changes my perspective on all these characters. I will never look at Yarl Poof the same again, or Ki-Adi-Mundi in the funnest ways. But then with all the other characters too, and just seeing what kind of a difference they made with people makes Order 66 hurt even more, which I didn't think would be possible after the Clone Wars. But watching Ki-Adi-Mundi die now is just going to be even more hurt. I refuse to watch it. I don't even want to see it. I need to get over the emotion of this book first, and then I'll go back and watch it. But But yeah, what a great book. I absolutely loved it. And thank you so much, Meg, for bringing me on it. It's been a really fun conversation. It was something I was looking forward to all day, not because of the book, but just because you and I met so many years ago, and this is the first time we've actually been on air together. So thank you for the invite. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. We'll have to do it again. Why don't you, as a final parting gift to the listeners, tell everyone where they can find more of you.
Yeah, so you can find us at cantinacast.com. That has all our links and everything else. We are on every social media platform at the Cantina Cast. There's a THE in there because I think at the time somebody had already had that, and now it's gone. I can't get it back, but whatever. But at the Cantina Cast is the show for social media. If you want to follow me and my shenanigans, you can follow me at Albert M. Padilla. 99% of the time, all I post is Star Wars stuff, and it's either things that I've made up, like images or videos, or my own thoughts and random thoughts about Star Wars, whatever. I promise you, I don't really get into anything else. There's no politics on there. There's nothing about really other franchises. It's almost exclusively Star Wars, but you can find me at Albert M. Padilla on every social media platform out there as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Meg.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on Substack at Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. There are so many ways you can support the show, and all of those ways are linked in the show description. The newest way is to become a member of our Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to an exclusive show and a sticker. And if we get 500 people to support the Patreon per month, I can hire an editor. That would be great for me, and maybe for you too. So if you'd like to support the show with just $1 a month, you can do it that way. Or you can just keep listening and sharing the episodes. That is also helpful, and I appreciate it. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.